19th, 2007. We are in the study of Mr. Birgpatil at Newton House on South Road in Marlboro. Interviewer, Rose Bernhardt. Audio, Taylor Curlin-Smith. Video, Mesa Kennedy, and photo, Max Lyons. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your background. Have you always lived in Marlboro, or did you move here from somewhere else?
I moved here from Providence, Rhode Island. I used to teach at Brown University before coming to Marlboro College.
Yeah.
So I moved to Marlboro in 1987. And since then I've lived here. This is the only place where I lived for so long, actually. I've never lived anywhere for more than 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Where else have you lived?
Oh, I was born in India, then I was educated in England, and then I came to the US in 1970 to do postdoctoral work at Yale University, and then I went back to England, then went back to India, and sort of been traveling back and forth. But since 1986, I've been in the States.
Yeah. So you've lived in Marlboro for how long?
20 years.
Wow.
I'm a real veteran now.
Yeah. And where have you lived in Marlboro over the years?
Good question. My first place was beautiful. It was on Moss Hollow Road. And coming from Providence, which is not a very large town, but I mean it's a fair-sized town. Coming to Marlboro and living on Moss Hollow Road, it was very nice, very romantic, enchanting, very quiet. But the snow was very deep that year, the year I came. And I think since then, this is the first time we've had so much snow here. Then my second place was, the town after Marlboro town. There's that big barn-like place on the right. Across the road from Holzapfel's, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so I was there in the basement. There's an apartment in the basement. I was there for 2 years, then for, I think, 10 years, I was on South Road at Augusta Bartlett's place. And then I moved here, I think, 3 years ago.
Fairly recently, you became a U.S. citizen. Of what country were you a citizen before coming to the U.S.?
Well, I became U.S. citizen in 1996. And before that, I was a citizen of England and India. So this is my third citizenship.
Please tell us a little bit about your decision to take that step.
To become citizen?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's a very good question actually. I would not have become American citizen if it hadn't been for Vermont. I love Vermont. So that's why I became American citizen.
And did you go to school when you were young in India? Or?
I went to a British school in India, the kind of school that had all British teachers and children of British officers who were still in India. I was born actually in 1933. So I was 14 when the British left India. So my first 10 years were spent in a British school in India. And then I went to England for university. And I did my graduation from the University of Manchester in England, north of England. Also my PhD from there. And then came to Yale to do my postdoctoral work.
And did you travel a lot when you were a child?
Oh yes, I travelled a lot actually because let me explain. We have the British towns in India were called cantonments, which were like American army bases abroad. And I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, who was in the army, the British Army. There were two kinds of armies in India: the British Army, which was made up of British soldiers and officers, and the British Indian Army, where the senior officers were British and Indian, and the soldiers were Indian, different regiments. So wherever he was transferred, I would go with him with my
Yeah.
grandfather. Yes.
Yeah. And so, where did you travel to when you went with him?
Oh, I travelled all the way from a place called Peshawar, which is in Pakistan now, all the way to Calcutta, in the south in India, Bangalore, and in central India, wherever there were these bases, you know, the cantonment towns.
What are some of the ways your schooling was different than schools today in the U.S.?
Well, my schooling was different because it was very traditional British kind of schooling. The sort of freedom you have in American schools, you know, where you can call your teachers by their first name and you call David, and so forth. That wouldn't have happened at my school.
Yeah.
Our teachers were always called Mr. So-and-so. And we would always address them as Sir. We have very friendly relations with our teachers, but the teachers were always treated as though they were sort of gods, you see, and you could never question them. Whereas the American system allows children, students to ask questions and develop thinking, independent thinking. That wasn't possible. So it was just one-way process. They had the knowledge and they had to transmit it to us, and we just took it down, made notes, you see.
What brought you to the United States, and when did you first come here to work and live?
I came to the United States to do my postdoctoral work at Yale as a Fulbright scholar. That was in 1970, 71 to 70, 72. And then I came to Brown University as visiting faculty in the early 80s. And then I transferred to Marlboro.
Recently you published a book. What is the title?
It wasn't really quite recent. I published a novel about 3 years ago. Do you want to see a copy?
Sure.
Could you have me on that brown back up there?
You want me to hold it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a book.
Wow. Cool. And have you published other books during your career?
This is a novel, but before I came to Marlboro College, I was at universities. I taught at universities, and at universities you had to do a lot of research all the time. So I published a book on T.S. Eliot, the poet. This is long back in the 70s. And also edited critical editions of John Steinbeck's novel Grapes of Wrath and Moby Dick, novels, and then published a lot of articles on Shakespeare and so on.
Do you mostly write poetry, fiction, plays, or non-fiction?
I used to write a lot of poetry in the past, before I came to Marlboro. And then I started writing fiction after coming to Marlboro. There's something in the air here, you know.
Do you prefer one kind of writing over the others?
Oh, no. I still write poetry, but I'm not very happy with what I write. Don't want to go into all kinds of details, but I think it has something to do with my feeling that my poetry is not written in a very special language, you see. It's not, my language is very, very derivative, it's very British, you see. And for poetry you need a language which is not somebody else's language, but I do not have my own language. The language I have is British English, and it's easier to write fiction in that kind of language. At least that's how I feel.
When did you realize that you wanted to be a writer?
I started writing poetry when I was at school.
Yeah.
Yes. Although when I was at school, unlike young people today, we didn't really tell anybody that we were writing poetry because it wasn't considered manly to write poetry. In British public schools, you were expected to play cricket and football, our kind of football, not soccer as you call it, and hockey, and then go out trekking and mountain climbing and that sort of thing, all manly sports.
Yeah.
So when I went to England and I began to publish poetry at the University of Manchester.
Do you come from a family of writers?
No. I come from a family of soldiers, actually. So
Yeah.
my mother was a very artistic person.
Yeah.
She used to sing, and she used to read a lot,
Yeah.
She introduced me to all the writers of our time, like Dickens and Kipling, and so there were no artistic types in our family.
Yeah.
No writers.
Yeah. Who encouraged your early efforts to become a writer?
Oh, certainly I think my mother was very keen that I should write and explore my talent, but I got a very good lot of encouragement from poet friends in England, English poets who were my friends, contemporaries at university, and they read some of my poetry and they liked it and they published it, and so especially it's mostly friends actually.
Yeah.
Writer friends.
Yeah. Did you study writing at a university?
No, in our day there were no programs, creative writing programs, particularly in England. It was sort of an American thing, but now everywhere, even in England, there are creative writing programs at universities.
Yeah.
No. I think the only training I have that because I teach English literature, Shakespeare, and modern poetry and fiction. I know how to distinguish between good writing and bad writing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets in your way because you get too critical of what you write. You don't want to let it go. So.
Yeah. What colleges or universities have you attended?
The University of Manchester in England, as I told you, that was my university.
Yeah.
And I also briefly attended Cambridge in England. But I went back to Manchester because I was offered a fellowship to finish my PhD. So I went back to University of Manchester where I did all my work actually.
Yeah. What were the main areas you studied at university?
My main area was Shakespeare and his contemporaries. They're called Jacobean writers, his younger contemporaries. But it was mainly Shakespeare. My PhD dissertation was on Shakespeare and his contemporaries.
Yeah. Who do you feel have been your most important teachers?
Oh, I mentioned 3 teachers. One was a teacher who taught me at school in India.
Yeah.
His name was Tillinghast. We used to call him Tilly, not to his face, of course.
Yeah.
And he was a very upright man, very strict but also very affectionate. And he taught us English, and we were not allowed to make any grammatical mistakes.
Yeah.
But he was a very strict disciplinarian, and I think I owe a lot to him because he really monitored our writing at a very early age.
Yeah.
And then I had a very fine professor in England who taught us Shakespeare. And when I was at Yale, I mean, I was not a student there, but I came into contact with some very fine teachers. There was a very old, very senior professor, Professor Cleon Brooks, who used to teach English at Yale. So I would say that these three teachers were the most influential, but none of them was a creative writer.
What writers are among your favorites or have influenced your work the most?
Shakespeare and William Faulkner.
Can you tell me a little bit about how those writers have influenced you?
Well, Shakespeare's influence is so difficult to pinpoint. You know. In our day, we started reading Shakespeare at a very early age. We were given a book called Arthur Mee's Shakespeare, which was a sort of what used to be called a Baudelarized version. That is, all the bad words sort of deleted, you see, cleaned up copy. And so I think Shakespeare sort of influences one in a very different way. I don't want to sound pedantic with you folks, you know, but I think it's like religion. You know, Shakespeare is like religion, gives you all sort of experience you need to live in this sort of in our world. And Faulkner's influence is also very difficult to define, but I think I like Faulkner simply because he's able to write about a small place in the South where he lived, and yet managed to convey a sense of experience about the whole world, as it were. You know, so the small place for him is the whole world, as it were, you know.
When did you publish your first article or book?
Oh, long back. The first article was published, I think, sometime in the 60s. And yes, my first publication was an article on a British writer called E.M. Forster. And you know, since then I've published off and on.
How many years did it take you to become a professional writer?
Don't know really, frankly, because you by professional writer you mean creative writer? Well, my poetry was published in England when I was doing my graduate work. And so that would be when I was in my late 20s. And since then I've been writing, you know, so it's about mid to late 20s.
Why did you want to become a professional writer in the first place?
Well, I don't think I'm a professional writer in the sense somebody is professional by, you know, is professional in the sense of being a writer exclusively and nothing else. I have one foot in teaching, and I do writing in my spare time. I retired from Marlboro College a few years ago, so now I devote all my time to writing. But till about a few years ago, I used to teach 2 semesters and do some writing during summer break. And now I teach just one course in the fall and spend all my time writing.
What would you say is the hardest part of being a writer?
The hardest part is acquiring discipline. If you really want to write something which is worth reading for others, you have to have 2 things. Your writing should have meaning to all others who are going to read it, not just to yourself, you know. So if your personal happiness, unhappiness, don't really count for much unless you can convey them in a form, in a language which makes sense to others, you see.
Yeah.
And that's most difficult, you know, how to write in such a way that it will be meaningful to others who read it.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you please describe a typical day when you write?
It depends really on at what stage your writing is.
Yeah.
When you write poetry, sometimes you can finish a poem within a day or two. Sometimes you dash it off and then come back to it and polish it up later on.
Yeah.
For fiction, it takes me at least 5 years to complete a book, because first 2 years you sort of do general snooping around, collecting information, doing research, and then you start writing. You make a first draft, and then you need at least 2 more years to bring your writing to the level where it would count for something.
Yeah.
So there are 3 processes. One is research for a year or 2, depending upon what sort of book you're planning to write. Then constructing the book. It's like storyboarding when you make a movie, you know. And then polishing, refining, fine-tuning can take up to 3 years sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there ever a point in your early career that you considered quitting?
As a writer?
Yeah.
No, I had doubts whether I had anything useful to say. And there were periods when I didn't write because I didn't have anything to say. And then when I had something to say in this book, you know, the book sort of wrote itself. I didn't have to do anything,
Yeah.
you know, except collect material and put it together.
Other than that period, what are some of the reasons why you have continued to write?
Well, I did a lot of research when I was teaching at universities, and the time came when I felt that research didn't really satisfy me.
Yeah.
Didn't give me the kind of satisfaction that writing gives you, you know, because your research is, in a way, a joint effort. You get information from others, work, extend arguments already developed by others and so forth. Sometimes you hit upon a new idea, but what you have to say is never completely thoroughly original. And the writing fiction or poetry, whether people, you know, other people like it or not, gives you a sense of having done something which is your very own.
Yeah. During your career, have you spent much time giving readings of your work?
Oh yes. I've read poetry here in England and also in India when I visit India. And I've been reading from this book and from the new book which I'm trying to finish.
Yeah.
So yes, I do a lot of reading, yes.
Yeah. Is there a reading that stands out in your mind as being particularly satisfying?
Yes, I'm a trained reader. You see, I was trained as actor when I was doing my research in England in English literature. I attended a school of drama and trained in acting and direction, stage direction. So I do 2 kinds of readings. Sometimes when I read other people, like T.S. Eliot or Dylan Thomas or Yeats or Shakespeare, you know, you perform. You know, it's like like a performance, like a stage performance,
Yeah.
right? Hamming, really, you see, as it is called. So that's different. But when I read from my own book, I focus on conveying the meaning of what I've written. So there are no theatrical elements in this sort of reading. It's more like trying to build a bridge between yourself and your listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a title for the book you are currently working on?
Yes.
What is it?
I don't know whether I should tell you about it because, I'm not quite sure when I'm going to finish it, but tentatively it's entitled Jackson Heights.
Yeah.
It's set in a place called Jackson Heights in New York, in Queens, although it is not really set literally in that place, but in that sort of community. Do you want to know more about that place?
Sure.
Well, Jackson Heights is a very interesting place because many immigrants over the last 100 years from different parts of the world came and made their homes, built their homes in Jackson Heights. Jackson Heights used to be a kind of upper class suburban place for New Yorkers who wanted to escape all the crowds in New York. And so the earliest immigrants, among the earliest immigrants were Irish, Italian, and Greek immigrants. And then once they made, enough money, they all moved to the suburbs. And then there was a big immigration from Eastern Europe of Jews coming to the United States before and after World War II. And so a lot of Jewish families actually lived there, and some of them still live there. You see, some Irish, Jewish, Italian families are still there. And then in the 60s, when there was a large population of Indian, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis and Chinese coming to the United States, Koreans actually, so they all found it very easy to get by houses in Jackson Heights, and the last few years they've been living there and they've prospered. So Jackson Heights to me is a very interesting place. Somehow or other it seems to be very inviting, first of all, to foreigners, and it's something probably in this is being very romantic, something in the air of Jackson Heights, which makes people come there and live there. Large number of Latinos, Hispanics now live in Jackson Heights. So it's a very mixed community. And most people who live in Jackson Heights seem to accept each other. It's a very multi-ethnic kind of community. And so there are some wonderful eating places if you're fond of eating foreign fusion food, you see. You can go to a Colombian restaurant, Indian restaurant, Afghani restaurant, and it's very jolly. It's like a bazaar, like an Eastern, Indian bazaar, without a lot of goods being sold on sidewalks. That's the only difference, you see. In bazaars, they have stalls on the sidewalks, you see. But it's that kind of informality, which I like.
What do you like to read for pleasure?
I have favourite writers. For pleasure, I normally reread writers I admire very much, people like Dickens and Jane Austen. And I also read Saul Bellow, who was one of our neighbours actually, In fact, he had a house in Halifax. He was a Nobel Prize winning writer. And then I read a fair amount of poetry.
Yeah.
One of my favourite poets is an American poet called Louise Gluck.
Yeah.
Gluck, G-L-U-C-K.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the New Yorker like everybody else, as you
Mm-hmm.
can see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you become a professor at Marlboro College?
I was on a contract at Brown University,
Mm-hmm.
and my contract was coming to an end, and I was planning to go and teach in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, there was a senior professor here at Marlboro College who suddenly retired for health reasons.
Yeah.
And so Marlboro College invited me to come and teach as visiting faculty for a year. And they asked me to stay on after that first year, so I decided to stay on. I liked the place.
Yeah. For how long have you been a professor there?
20 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
What courses have you taught?
Mainly Shakespeare,
Mm-hmm.
and I also teach courses on modern American and British fiction and poetry.
Yeah.
And I teach a course on what's called semiotics and post-structuralism, which is a new critical approach.
Yeah. Would you please describe a typical day at work as a professor, from when you arrive at the college until you leave for home?
When I was full-time faculty, I would go to college around 8:30 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have classes till about 12:30 in the afternoon. And then I would go and have lunch in the dining hall, where, Marlboro
Mm-hmm.
is a very small college, so all students and teachers eat together in the dining hall. And then I would go back to my office and do tutorials.
Yeah.
Because at Marlboro, all students have to write what's called a senior project. It's called a plan, senior plan, which is written over 2 years. And it's generally interdisciplinary. And so you give tutorials to the students who are going to, who are on plan with you, as it were, whose work you're supposed to supervise. And that would go on till about 3:34. And by that time, by the time you finish teaching, you were totally exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
So you would just come back and put your feet up and watch television, something like that.
Yeah. What do you feel are the more important parts of your teaching?
Oh, before I came to Marlboro, I taught at places where the classes used to be quite large.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at Marlboro, our classes tend to be small because we are a very small college. Our classes can range from about 6 students to 10 students, 6 to 10 students. So teaching here is more like a long, friendly conversation with students, exploring the subjects together. Instead of just sitting and spouting for an hour and a half and people taking notes.
Yeah.
So it's very satisfying. You get to know your students very well, and you can see how each student actually develops his or her plan, and how the students mature from fresh arrivals during the first year to the 4th year, the final year, when they become seniors. So you can see them grow from high school students to college students.
Yeah. What people or experiences would you say have influenced you in your life as a teacher?
What people?
Or experiences?
I don't know. I just love teaching, I think. I don't think there's anyone who's influenced me very much. I discovered very early that I enjoyed teaching, and particularly enjoyed teaching Shakespeare. So teaching is a way of revisiting your favorite writers. And you had to convey the enthusiasm that you feel for your writers, you know, for your favorite writers, to the students.
Yeah.
So it's an experience which has it has a number of what's the word I'm looking for? It's very difficult to actually break it down to simple ideas, you know. But it's one grows as a teacher also.
Yeah.
You know, you can see, for instance, when I was young, I would just go and try to impress students with my knowledge. You see.
Yeah.
Now I don't do that.
Yeah.
I like to sort of get students to speak first, and you know, get them to see what is worth seeing in the writer, instead of saying, "Look, this is what it, you know, this is what you should really read, and you should like." You know, you don't have to bully people into liking writers. You should teach them, as it were, to develop their own approach. And that happens slowly.
Yeah.
Because, and Marlboro is very useful for that kind of teaching, because you're not, there are few restrictions on time. You know, your classes can go on for as long as 2 hours sometimes. So you're not in a hurry to vacate the classroom for the next teacher, you see. At Brown, for instance, you had only about an hour. And after that hour, you had to get out of the classroom, because there would be other classes and students would be lined up outside your classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Difficult question, you know. I'm not quite sure whether I've really given you a reasonably good answer or not, but I hadn't thought about it very carefully. That's a very interesting question you posed there.
Yeah. What are some of the parts of your job that you really like?
Teaching. I don't like administration.
Yeah.
Don't like long committees, meetings, and teaching is something I like very much, yes.
Yeah.
And also I like attending performances, plays, concerts.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a lot of those in Marlboro.
Yeah. What are some of the ways the job of teaching has changed over time?
The job of teaching has changed over time in one important way, because our generation didn't have any other distractions except sports.
Yeah.
You know, there was practically no television in those days. So books were part of one's entertainment in a way. You know, not in the same way as watching a soap opera.
Yeah.
But if you had nothing else to do, you just sat down and read a good book. You see. Today there are so many other distractions, with the results that students, very bright students, very articulate, very bright, very well informed, but they do not have the same sort of feeling for language that our people have.
Yeah.
You see, our generation now.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know about you folks at Marlboro at the school, but you know, we used to learn to sing not only songs but memorize poetry.
Yeah.
I don't think students like doing that very much today.
No. No. In what way have students changed during the course of your teaching career?
I think they, you know, the students, I have no complaints. I still admire them very much. In fact, students are very intelligent, sharp-witted, articulate. Um, Again, depending upon what sort of background they have, kind of parents they have, the sort of schools they've attended. Particularly at Marlboro, we get very bright students. And the only difference I notice is that between Marlboro and other places, that our students are not as driven for grades.
Yeah.
Whereas at big universities where I've taught, students are very keen on grades, And so learning and writing papers has that slightly different sense that sort of different sense that I've been used to. See, we think we belong to a generation where learning was not seen as a chore, something where you simply sat down and read a lot because you wanted a good grade. Well, everyone wanted a good grade, certainly. But students today are much more practical in the way they decide what subjects they're going to major in. They would say, okay, is there any, if I major in this, that and the other, will I get a good job? I don't think we were so concerned about what will happen after university. If you went to a good university, you were more than you were going to get a decent job anyway. And in my case, I don't think I even had to worry about this, because I started teaching even while I was a graduate student, you see, and then so I never had to actually worry about finding a job. And I think I don't think I would have been good for at any other job, So I didn't have to sit down and say, will this particular job bring me enough money and that sort of thing, Should I go to law college and get a law degree, things like that. So today students do that. Some of my very bright students here at Brown, here as well as at Brown, whom I thought would become writers and artists and so forth, have actually gone to law degrees because I've written letters of recommendation for them, and they become lawyers. Whereas when they were students, I expected them to be poets or playwrights and so forth. You see. So I don't blame them for becoming lawyers, but what I'm saying is that people are much more concerned about whether or not they're going to get a reasonably good employment if they did this just literature, for instance.
What have some of your former students gone on to do?
Some of my former students have gone on to do graduate work at good universities. One of my brightest students actually went to Harvard, and he's finishing his PhD in English. And some of them have gone into, as I told you, other professions like law and computers. One of my bright students actually, after doing her, after graduating from Marlboro, went into computers, and she's become a computer wizard.
What people or experiences would you say have influenced you in your personal life?
Parents mostly. And teachers and friends. I have very little interest in following some big learned man. All my teachers were very humane, modest people, and they never talked down to us, like some big visionary who has some spiritual knowledge to give you, I'm not very spiritual, so I have no what's the word I'm looking for? I don't believe in masters and gurus who give you the right direction and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say mostly friends and.
Yeah. In what way? Oh, oops. What do you like to do when you're not working at writing or teaching?
Listen to music.
Yeah.
And watch movies.
Yeah. Is there anything else about your work or your life that you'd like to mention but that I haven't asked about?
No, my dear, you asked me such wonderful questions. I wish I had proper answers for all of them. No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome.